just take a few deep breaths. Inhale and exhale. You can leave your eyes open or close them and rest your hands wherever you'd like. As I said, you can close your eyes or look at a point in front of you. Just let the tension go from the day. Just noticing your breath. I'd like you to ask yourself a question. Ask yourself, why am I here in this space? What is my intention? So as an answer floats up, just hold on to that, and you can even gently place it on your heart. And let it sink in. What's my intention? And just take a few more deep breaths, in and out. And you can return your attention to the room. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. So I think most of you kind of know the people sitting next to you, but you can take a moment maybe and just introduce yourself to the person in front of you or next to you or behind you and just say hello and welcome each other to the space. Thank you all for coming here today. And maybe we can just kind of shout out popcorn style. It's a small enough group. Why don't we kind of go around and just say a word or two about what brought you here, what you intend to get out of, what's your intention for tonight. So yeah, just anybody who wants to start. Yeah. You're in, yeah, so just, you can just, welcome, yeah. So you can just state whatever your intention is for tonight.
Self-care.
Self-care, okay. Yeah, anything else?
New techniques for self-care.
Okay, new techniques for self-care.
Do the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Understanding self-compassion.
Okay, great, right, thank you. Thank you. So, yes, as you know, my name is Ravi Chandra. I'm a writer and psychiatrist here in San Francisco, and I've been a mindfulness practitioner for about 20 years, working on mindfulness, loving kindness, and compassion meditations. And then on 11/9/2016, everything kind of changed, and I found I had to dig a lot deeper to cultivate my sense of humanity and a sense of identity in these difficult times. So I took an intensive mindful self-compassion class and also a compassion cultivation training 8-week course. And then I began to take teacher's trainings for both of those. So I offer now both the mindful self-compassion and the compassion cultivation training 8-week courses, and I'll be offering another cycle early next year. But those really helped me, again, to maintain my sense of humanity and identity, and I hope to bring some principles of mindful self-compassion to you tonight and reinforce those for you, for people who've already taken the class, and hopefully have some fun along the way as well. And so just a little story. Last night, I was on my way home from work after a 9-hour day. So I stopped off at Trader Joe's just to pick up a few things. Picked up a few things, went to the express checkout lane. I'm waiting. The young lady behind the cashier kind of waves towards me, and I thought she was going to be my cashier at the second register. So I walk over towards her, and she says, no, I was just waving to someone behind you. And she said, but now the shame of your mistake is written all over your face for all to see. So I said, great, thanks. That landed on me, right? And when did the checkout counter at Trader Joe's become an episode of Say Anything? No, it's not that, I don't have any shame. It's just my pride at knowing that you would be my cashier, thinking that you would be my cashier. And so she thought about it for a moment. She says, no shame at all. And I said, no, there's too much toxic shame going around anyway. So I gave her that little bit of therapy. And she took it in, she thought about it, she rolled her eyes up, and she shot back at me. So no shame. So if I were about to commit genocide, I would need to feel no shame. So boom, I'm thinking, I just came to pick up some soy milk and some pepper jack cheese, and now I have to deal with baby Hitler. Great. So I gathered myself and I said, well, no, if you were about to commit genocide, I would strenuously oppose and object to your behavior, but I would do my best to accept you as a person. And she kind of thought about that. And so hopefully she's still thinking about that. But, I think we have to work our way up to baby Hitler and what we would do. But today is just a chance to talk about self-care and self-compassion and work on our own difficult emotions. So, yeah. So, hi, welcome, come on in. Okay, so compassion is how we do human. Contrary to popular opinion, it's not Amazon. Okay, Amazon is not how we do human, it's a good adjunct. Amazon was very helpful for putting together this material, Sammy's camera, Apple, Adobe stock images, so they were all very helpful, but compassion is how we really do human. Caring for others is literally what we do best, despite glaring examples to the contrary and tragic shortcomings. We care for children, family, tribe, and community, and networks of caring strengthen us. We have evidence of healthcare going back 1.6 million years, but it probably goes back even further than that. On the left, you see a photograph of a 4,000-year-old skeleton from northern Vietnam. And this young man, who died around age 20 or so, was born with Cripple-Feil syndrome, which left him disabled, unable to move his arms, unable to care for himself or feed himself, but he lived for 10 years before he died. So clearly he was cared for by his family and community. That was 4,000 years ago. And here's some renderings also of Neanderthals. And there's evidence of Neanderthals even carrying their disabled family members or tribe members around with them across long journeys. So clearly compassion goes back a long way. And we wouldn't be here without care and compassion. As I said, Neanderthals and early humans provided health care. And a research article stated that the provision and receipt of health care may therefore reflect some of the most fundamental aspects of a culture. Health care is the world's oldest profession. So compassion is central to our social being, and our social being is central to our identity, who we are. The Dalai Lama said, at the most fundamental level, our nature is compassionate. Cooperation, not conflict, lies at the heart of the basic principles that govern our human existence. An Ubuntu proverb from Africa states, people become people through other people. Our relationships make us who we are. I wrote in my book, Face Buddha, we are who happens to us and what we make of the happening. We are who happens to us and what we make of the happening. John Bowlby, psychiatrist and attachment theorist, said, there is no such thing as a baby. There is a baby and someone. From our earliest moment, we are in relationship. And of course, compassion is or can be or should be a major component of relationship. So caring for others generally comes natural to us, but still needs cultivation. Caring for ourselves and our inner lives, though, is more challenging. We don't care for ourselves as well as we care for others. 78% of respondents in the US say they are more compassionate to other people when they suffer than they are to themselves. Self-compassion helps us cope with difficult situations and emotions. And self-compassion builds resilience and prevents burnout. So we'll talk more about that. So difficult emotions are all are present within all of us at some time, and all suffering is a crisis in connection. connection to ourselves, and connection to others. So here is a list of a lot of common difficult emotions: anger, hatred, hostility, shame, envy, jealousy, all emotions of social comparison, also feelings of inadequacy and insufficiency. So these come up commonly: sadness, depression, failure, social defeat, fear, anxiety, frustration, dissatisfaction, loneliness, isolation, rejection. So is there anybody here who has not experienced any of these? Okay, no. Okay, so we've all experienced them. I think I've experienced all of them at some point in my life, and so they're very powerful emotions to sit within us, but we don't always know what to do with them. We often get wrapped up in them. And also, these emotions don't just come up within ourselves, but they can also come out when we're confronted by difficult people, such as narcissists. People who make us feel like our needs, feelings, and thoughts are not important. And America over the last 50 years has become, according to research, increasingly narcissistic and individualistic. And so this has caused, I think, more problems. There's more depression, more anxiety, etc., than there were over 50 years ago. So we feel like our needs, feelings, and thoughts are not important when we're confronted with a difficult person or situation. We might feel angry, we might feel controlled, we might feel shamed by someone who's very narcissistic. We might feel gaslighted, that our reality has been distorted, devalued, helpless. We might feel a dread of seeing that person. We might get pushed inside of ourselves. It's called involution. So our thoughts and emotions go inside and it's hard to find ourselves again. We might feel like an extra in their movie. We might feel like an object that for their use to be discarded when they no longer need us. Alternatively, we could feel idealized, at least temporarily. And these are all due to a paucity or a turbulence in that difficult person's inner life. So we feel what they are unable to feel. Now, it would be nice if all of them came with name tags that said this: hello, I'm an egomaniac. But they don't, so we often get surprised. And it would be nice if we had the presence of mind that when we saw a difficult person, we could simply say this: keep calm and get over yourself. But often we don't have the presence of mind to do that. But that would be nice. But finding our way back to belonging, I think, is the way out of suffering. And friendliness and compassion bring us to connection and belonging with ourselves and others. So if we look at our inner life again, we might have many different emotions like joy, anger, surprise, sadness, fear, despair, confusion, disgust, and mistrust, all part of our emotional inner worlds. But if we can add friendliness and compassion, it kind of makes everything go easier. And I like to call friendliness and compassion umami. So you know what umami is. Umami is the fifth flavor. There's sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami. And umami makes food taste more delicious and tasty. And I think if we add the umami of friendliness and compassion towards ourselves to our inner life, we can make our inner life and relatedness more tasty and delicious. Okay. So how do we do that? It basically starts with asking this question. Given a difficult situation, how would I treat a dear friend going through this? What would I say? What would be the tone of my voice? What gestures, body language, or touch would I use? And generally people are able to respond how they would treat a dear friend. Well, you'd start to apply that to yourself as well. So here are the stages of compassion. First, to notice the suffering, to develop concern for the suffering, to generate the desire to help the suffering, and then actually taking action to relieve the suffering. And I think of these as like train stops or BART stops. So you get to Embarcadero, don't get off the train, you notice the suffering. get to Montgomery Station, develop concern for the suffering. Okay, now you're at Powell Street, you're generating the desire to help. Finally, you get to Civic Center, and you can get out and take action to relieve the suffering. But often people get off at the earlier stops, because they don't, and so they don't feel like they can do it, go all the way. But the mindful self-compassion and compassion cultivation training helps you go all the way to the destination. Okay, so this is an image from Emma Seppala's website. She's a researcher, and it's a very big infographic, but I've just summarized it. But there are benefits of self-compassion. Basically, that self-criticism is self-defeating, and it does not help you. Whereas self-compassion is a healthy alternative that reaps results, and we'll talk a little bit about those results. But it helps you get up after you've had a difficult time, after you've fallen down. So there's that Chinese saying, fall down 9 times, get up 10. Well, this helps you get up all those 10 times. So there are 3 components of mindful self-compassion. There's the mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. So this is another way I like to look at it. So here I am, stuck inside with all my difficult emotions. Add some mindfulness, feels better. Add some common humanity, some connection with others. Brain is expanding. And finally, with self-kindness, your brain is expanded to its full potential. So these are guaranteed results. Okay, all right. So mindfulness, we'll start with each of these. So mindfulness is a contrast to over-identification with thoughts, emotions, and stories. So mindfulness itself is awareness of present experience with acceptance. And it takes cultivation to do that. And it's noticing when an emotion spills into a story, judgment, or criticism. And it's about being with an emotion rather than being the emotion, and identifying with it and getting carried away and wrapped up with it. So we notice the emotion with mindfulness and care for it. So mindfulness is a balanced state of awareness. You don't suppress or avoid emotions, but you notice them and you tend to them. And it does require cultivation, and it changes the brain, especially what's called the default mode network. So you may not have heard of that, but the default mode network is lit up in red here on this slide. So it's a midline set of structures in the brain that's active when the mind is at rest and inactive when the mind is focused and engaged in a task. So mindfulness is that task that helps the default mode network to be inactive. And it involves thinking about the self, thinking about others, or thinking about the past or the future. And this is another example of what the default mode network does. It looks for problems. It creates a concept of self, which is the way you think about yourself, your belief, purposes, traits, etc. within the world. And it projects your concept of self into the past and the future, and then looks for problems in both categories as well. So you can see how this default mode network can really take you out of the moment. And so this is what happens with mindfulness and other kinds of meditation. It tunes down. So here's experienced meditators demonstrate decreased default mode network during meditation. So you see with choiceless awareness or loving kindness meditation or concentration meditation, you see the default mode network tuning down. And so that's great. And so they call it the default mode network because that's what we're doing pretty much all the time. And it makes sense from a survival perspective to scan for problems and create a narrative self. But there's also another self which we can cultivate, the experiential self, grounded in the moment, aware of bodily sensations, aware of emotions, and so forth. So that's a different way of experiencing yourself, and you can have a dialogue with the narrative self when you're grounded in mindfulness. So the next phase of mindful self-compassion is common humanity versus isolation. So with self-compassion, we see our own experiences of imperfection and difficulties as part of the larger human experience. So everyone suffers. Suffering is a normal part of life. Everyone, many others have experienced exactly this emotion in some way. We are not alone. And that's such an important reminder to have. Because often when we're struggling or when we fail at a task, we feel that something has gone wrong or that something is wrong with us. So that this shouldn't be happening. But this creates a feeling of abnormality that is very isolating. It's as if everyone else is leading a perfectly normal, happy life, but not me. This is not true, but it can feel true if we don't allow ourselves to feel a sense of common humanity. So the third phase of mindful self-compassion is self-kindness versus self-judgment. And here's, you can see the image, all these difficult emotions, primarily of depression, loss, despair, sadness, being held with kind awareness. So with self-compassion, we treat ourselves with kindness, care, understanding, and support, just as we would treat a friend we cared about. And most people treat themselves much more harshly than this. So to learn the skills to not say cruel things to ourselves that we would never say to others in the midst of our suffering. Compassion includes concern about suffering along with the intention to do something about it. And self-compassion involves actively soothing and comforting ourselves when we're in pain and taking whatever action is needed to help ourselves when we're struggling. Okay, so again, to review, we have with self-compassion, mindfulness versus not compassionate over-identification with thoughts, stories, and emotions. We have a sense of common humanity versus isolation with our emotion, and a sense of self-kindness, or cultivating the qualities of self-kindness as opposed to self-judgment and self-criticism. All right. So Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer on the left here, they say that mindful self-compassion is being in a state of loving, connected presence. When we embrace ourselves and our lives and others with a sense of loving, connected presence, our experience becomes radically transformed. So the mindfulness creates space around our suffering, and the common humanity and self-kindness allow you to create warmth, and more warmth allows you to create more space, and it's kind of a virtuous cycle of holding difficulty. All right, so love yourself. You'll be spending a lot of time with you. I think that's very important. And it's not, loving yourself with self-compassion is not the same as self-esteem. So self-compassion doesn't desert us when we fail, as self-esteem does. And self-esteem is more contingent than self-compassion. Research shows that self-compassion is less contingent on things like physical attractiveness or successful performances, and provides a more stable sense of self-worth over time. So self-compassion is actually linked to less social comparison and less narcissism than self-esteem. And it also flies in the face of typical modern ego identity, such as creating an identity based on achievements, possession, and status. It's a compassion and recognition of you as a person, as a human being, not in terms of what you do, etc. All right. So here's a little bit about the physiology of self-compassion and self-criticism. So here's a person kind of yelling at himself. And self-criticism involves what's called the reptilian, or a primitive center of the brain. It's called the amygdala. It's kind of an almond-shaped part of the brain that lies deep within the brain. But that's responsible for survival emotions, fight, flight, or freeze. And when it's turned inwards, it causes stress, depression, and anxiety. And it releases all these bad hormones that might be good in the short term, but really cause problems over the long term: cortisol, adrenaline, and and so forth. Well, self-compassion instead involves the mammalian caregiving or nurturing system, which is based on the frontal lobes and other related parts of the brain, a higher, more recently evolved part of the brain. And it involves, if you've noticed any a mother or father with their baby, or any animal, a tiger with their cub, you'll notice them with warmth, providing warmth and soothing touch and gentle vocalization. So that's all connected to the mammalian nurturing system. And this releases oxytocin, which is the cuddle chemical or the bonding chemical. So that helps you feel good and relate to yourself and to others. And also endogenous opiates. So it's a very healthy and a virtuous cycle to start up within ourselves. Okay, so again, so here's the stress response turned inwards, and self-compassion. So fight. When we fight ourselves, we load ourselves with self-criticism, self-judgment, and blame. When we treat ourselves with self-compassion, we can turn that towards self-kindness. Flight, fleeing our emotion, can lead to isolation. But instead, with self-kindness, we find, with common humanity, we can expand our awareness and not flee our difficult emotion, but feel connected to others who also experience this emotion. And finally, freezing, if we turn that stress response inwards and freeze, we ruminate, we over-identify with a thought, emotion, or story, and we stay stuck in it. But with a sense of mindfulness, we can expand and let go of those thoughts, emotions, and stories, and just be aware of our present experience with acceptance. All right, so mindful self-compassion is supported by scientific research. There are over 1,200 research articles to date, and self-compassion is associated with fewer negative states like depression, anxiety, and shame. And self-compassion is strongly linked to positive states like happiness, life satisfaction, and optimism. And it's also linked to better physical health. So these are all good qualities to bring into our inner lives. Finally, I would say, just on a larger basis, I think that compassion is our social, cultural, evolutionary, and neuro-psychological imperative. It's really important to do this when we have the opportunity to learn and to grow. We must, I think, evolve from motivating ourselves with reward and punishment, which involves self and other criticism, shame, blame, and scapegoating. And they are functions controlled again by the amygdala and our survival brain. And evolve towards our nurturing and caregiving system for ourselves and also for others, which are the cortical regions, the frontal lobes, the insula, and so forth. And so finally, cultivating that caregiving system, we move towards love, compassion, understanding, curiosity, friendliness, and long-term planning. So I think it's very important to do this, and I'm glad I've been able to share some basic principles with you. My organization, I teach mindful self-compassion workshops, which is 8 weeks, 2.5 hours per week, along with home exercises and guided meditation. And I'll also be teaching a compassion cultivation training, and that's 8 weeks, 2 hours a week, also with home exercises and guided meditation. And I also provide other lectures which are coming up in the next 8 weeks. There are some websites. If you don't get a chance to take one of these workshops, you can go to the centerformsc.org. There are a lot of there are online workshops available, but there are also guided meditations. You can also see those links to online guided meditations on my website as well. And the compassion cultivation training comes out of the Compassion Institute, which came out of Stanford's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, but now it's housed outside. But you can also go to compassioninstitute.com and find out more about them. So thank you. That wraps up my lecture, and if you'd like, we can just go through a little exercise to kind of guide you through those principles of mindful self-compassion. Whoops, let me put up that slide to remind you what those phases are. So just get comfortable again. And first of all, so again, just get comfortable where you are. Oh, did you have another question, or did something come up? Oh, I thought you had a...
No.
Okay. So just get comfortable and feel your chair underneath you. You can close your eyes or leave your eyes open, whatever feels comfortable for you. And take a few deep breaths in and out. Again, just settle into this moment. And you can watch your breath with your awareness as it travels in from your nose to your chest to your abdomen and out again. Just feel the warmth of your hands. Perhaps you have one hand in the other. You can also place a hand over your heart if you want. Feel the warmth of your hand on your chest. Just feel that soothing touch. You can leave your hand there or return it to your lap. Now I want you to think of a minor distress. Say it was the distress of getting here today. So something not too big, but just something that was an obstacle, and maybe you felt anxiety or worry about getting to the right place. But just think of that minor distress. And maybe you notice that in your body somewhere. I'm going to walk through the steps of self-compassion in this self-compassion mantra. So you're noticing this distress in your mind or in your body. And say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. And that's mindfulness, just noticing. This is a moment of suffering. Now say to yourself, suffering is a part of life. It's normal to have distress, dissatisfaction, and worry. I'm not alone with this. Suffering is a part of life. I may not like it. It might hurt in the moment. And that's okay to say that too. You can find your own way of saying suffering is a part of life. This hurts. This was uncomfortable. Finally, say to yourself, in this moment of suffering, may I at least be kind to myself. In this moment of suffering, may I at least be kind to myself. And you can find a way to do that by just noticing the warmth of your hands, or feeling yourself in your body, reminding yourself of your connection to others. So that's the self-compassion mantra. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. And in this moment of suffering, may I at least be kind to myself. Now just release any tension from that exercise. Take a few more deep breaths. And return your attention to the room. You can open your eyes when you're ready. Okay. All right, how was that for people?
Nice.
Okay, good. So that's just one exercise of probably several dozen that we learn during the full 8-week course. And as I said, a number of these are available as guided meditations through my website, sflovedojo.org. If you go to the publicly accessible self-compassion material, you'll find links to all of that. Yeah, great. Well, thank you all for being here and sharing this experience, and perhaps I'll see some of you at the next lectures.
Thank you.